Video content is by far one of the most powerful ways to connect with your target audience, build trust, and generate sales. However, it's also become incredibly saturated and it's become more difficult than ever to actually stand out online with your video content. In this video, I sat down with Jack Gaisford, who's the founder of the Oydssey Agency, and Jack and his team have created over 2,000 videos for more than 300 brands, everyone from the likes of Huel and Microsoft to new and exciting startups and small businesses, to really help them stand out and cut through the noise with their marketing. And what I love about Jack is he also practices what he preaches, and he's built an incredible personal brand on LinkedIn, which has allowed him to generate over $1 million in sales from his organic content alone. This is an absolute masterclass on video content. So if you want to use video to get your business noticed online and really cut through the noise, make sure you stick around for this one. Let's get straight into it. Jack.
Hello.
I've been looking forward to this one for a while because content is such a massive thing, right? More and more businesses and brands these days know about content. They know how important it is. But what I hear a lot is like, oh, we've tried that. We've tried content. We've invested so much time and so much money into socials. We're not really seeing the returns from it. Like, how do you I guess, tackle that, or like what's the kind of starting point for brands who feel like they've kind of tried things already?
There's two things. So one comes down to time. People don't give it long enough. I think people underestimate how long things take in the content space to kind of compound and snowball and progressively increase in terms of reach, engagement, views, retention, etc. And the second piece is probably more down to a metric side. So setting tangible goals that you're trying to work towards, rather than having a very scattergun approach, which most people will do, most businesses will do, is they will post content on social, they'll go, oh, they've only reached a couple of thousand views, or maybe our engagement's really low, it hasn't worked. That's fine if you've got a metric of reaching a 5% engagement rate and it's maybe at 3 or 2%, it hasn't worked. So you need to figure out how you increase that. When you have a tangible metric and you have a kind of a North Star or goal that you're trying to work towards with your content, i.e. you're trying to increase your customer acquisition costs, or you're trying to increase the overall awareness and reach and views of that content, then you can grade and judge how the performance has worked. Content is increasing in demand, but I think very few people understand what really goes into making good, high-performing quality content. It's seen as this very quick 5-minute job, and it still is today, even though, I mean, we are in the highest of production studios I've ever seen for a podcast, which is amazing. I'm blown away by this. But this takes time to set up. The lights take time to, sort out. The cameras take time to get organized. And even that's the more technical side of things. It's a huge time investment to get that right. But yeah, for me, it comes down to people don't give it enough time, and people don't really understand what they're trying to achieve with their content. And that leads to people undervaluing or underappreciating what they're doing with their content.
Yeah, it's super fascinating because it's something you've talked about before in terms of like having how brands like will often they'll over optimize to try and find this one piece of content that just changes everything for them, whether it allows them to go viral, or it's going to be this one piece of content that allows them to kind of, scale their ad campaigns or whatever it is. And I just think it's the wrong way of looking at it, because what we very often see from like an advertising perspective is actually content should be working to just accelerate or amplify the natural customer journey. Like when whatever product or service people are buying, there's going to be natural things that come up. So questions, doubts, fears, concerns throughout that. And content can be an extension to kind of help people to build that trust. Kind of like, dating, relationships, like you have to build trust with people, and that's what content does. And it's an interesting thing though, isn't it? Because to your point, you kind of have to, you can't just like not measure the metrics at all, but I think being aware of what metrics you're measuring, when and why, is really important, and not judging it all through the same lens.
I agree. I think it's also like depending on what your metrics for success are. So, for example, if your metrics for success are you're trying to build community, or you're trying to establish trust, or you're trying to increase brand advocacy or loyalty, that's a very hard to track tangible metric. It's more of a feeling. It's more of an emotional response to content that I can't track how much you've increased your trust with me from my content.
Yeah.
I can't say Tom's increased his trust by 2% this month. But they often are the metrics that have the greatest power when it comes to supporting that buyer journey. When it comes to more tangible metrics like the physical data, so the reach, the awareness, the how long that view has been retained for, have they dropped off at a certain point, you can start to understand quantifiably what you need to change to make your content better. If you're noticing that people are dropping off on engagement at halfway through the video, it might be that you need to change the pace a little bit, or you need to change the structure a bit more. So it gives you better data to understand how to improve your content. But from my experience, the most powerful data, if you can really even call it that, isn't really even data. It's more of gut feeling. It's gut reaction. It's that you feel that it's working because you've started to have more conversations with people, and more people have started to mention your content in conversation. They are what fuels me to create more content all the time, because I know it works, but I can't prove on paper that it's increasing. It's a strange one.
That's such an interesting point, like because it is like you say, trust, right? It's such a hard thing to measure, and it is like it comes down to those kind of, you know, quantitative metrics versus like the qualitative metrics. And the qualitative ones, you can't necessarily always measure them in the same way. It is a really, but I guess to an extent you can kind of like, you know, it's one of those things where, look, if someone's watching, let's say like a YouTube video, for example, right, long form content, if somebody's watched a 20-minute YouTube video with you, it's very hard not for that piece of content not to have progressed the relationship.
I agree.
In some way, shape or form. It's almost like indisputable, right? So to an extent you can use, like to your point, like the duration, like are we hooking people? Are we getting them to stay for the length of this content? Because then everything else is a natural byproduct from there. That's something I wanted to come on to as well, actually, is the kind of evolution of content, right? Because we've kind of been on this like crazy journey of like, you know, YouTube and long form content, and then it's gone short form, and then like super short form with like things like TikTok and Reels, and it feels like that's the space we're in. And I saw you make a bit of content recently where you actually said about how, you know, you're leaning now more toward the long form again. Like everyone's like all bullish on, you know, short form and like, oh, we need to be making TikToks and Reels and things, and you're now going more toward long form, which I found really interesting. Why?
I think people are tired of short form. I think people are burnt out a little bit. Again, there's no data there that proves that. I just think from conversations that I've had, people are really exhausted from just that oversaturation of very similar looking. It's a style called like hyper edit content. It's
cuts every 2 seconds.
That's it. It's too intense. I think the problem is that style of editing blends into everything. If you know, let's say you have a property development company who's making that sort of content, and you have a healthcare consultant, I'm just throwing them out there, their content in that style is going to look identical to one another. Those very quick fire TikTok subtitles that come up, the bright yellow text, those really, really fast paced pieces of content. There's nothing that sets their personality or differentiates them as a brand. So it's really hard to pinpoint where each piece of content is coming from. The question that I like to ask people is, what was the last TikTok video that you watched? I'll ask you. Do you remember the last TikTok video that you watched? What was the last YouTube video that you watched?
Probably my own one.
Great.
It was
brilliant.
my own one.
Great.
Well,
Most people.
Actually, I tell a lie. It's Alex Hormozy. It's an Alex Hormozy video.
So you know what you watched. You know who it was from. Chances are you probably know what that creator does. You know a bit about their business. So from a brand perspective, because you have so much more time and retention consuming a long form piece of content, you build rapport with that person. The problem with short form is it's so fast, you don't consciously take it in. It's just a very quick, my life's boring, or I'm waiting for a train, or I don't know, I need to fill this time with something that's not just boring life, and I need to now fill myself with content that's just going to get me past the next 5 minutes, but it's not something that you remember. So from a brand perspective, it's I mean, I've shifted a lot of my content now towards long form because you have time spent with people. And even though that's, again, it's not a tangible metric, I can't say that Lisa's watched my TikToks and then she's watched my YouTubes and she's now increased her trust, but I know that she's a more loyal viewer or closer to becoming a customer because she spent 20 minutes with me a day watching a piece of content. She's probably a higher level of education in terms of what we do because it's given me more time to explain the service or how it works or show the behind the scenes of the service that we offer, as opposed to just saying, here's my 3 tips to make your videos great. It's come along for a 20-minute video and I'll show you the process of how we make all of our videos. I'll show you the studio, I'll show you the team, I'll show you our mindset, and it's that relationship building that's really important. But I'm noticing a lot of creators shift to long form now as well. So even Alex Hormozy, the guy who pioneered Hormozy style editing, is doing weekly vlogs, long form vlogs. He did a
post about that, didn't he? Saying he's got like because he was literally, his videos were very similar to Mr. Beast.
Yes.
Did you notice?
Yes.
Like he kind of literally followed his. He even mentioned it. I think followed his blueprint, and then he's like, I don't want to do this anymore. And the video I watched him earlier, it was like a whiteboard video, one of his kind of old school 20-minute just in front of a whiteboard.
They work though, right? It's a good way to establish your personality with people. I think in short form, because you're trying to maximize it for attention, and there's a science to it as well as a creative element. There's a technical, you've got to grab people in the first frame now, not even the first 3 seconds. You've got to hold retention really, really quickly. You've got to make sure that the pace is fluctuating, so it's not just one long video and it's going fast and then it's slightly going slow. So kind of the beastification of content to a degree. But long form content, you can have those ums and those ers, and you can have those mistakes and those hiccups because it's raw and it's, I take it back to that very buzzword, but it's very authentic. And I think people connect with that more than ever because they are so exhausted with short form that they just want to take it back to where it kind of originated from, which was long form vlogs, a bit of long form personal branding, actually having deeper connections with people rather than just endlessly scrolling. So that's a long way of saying that I'm shifting more towards long form. Short form is still important. I think it's good for a pattern interrupt to show that you're there and show that you exist, but I don't feel that it adds massive value to supporting the buyer journey. I think it reminds people that you exist, but I think that's kind of all it does, whereas long form can really tick a lot more boxes, and I think you see more tangible revenue-driven data from longer form content as opposed to short form. But it also depends on organic or paid or all these other areas, right? Like paid, short form's kind of the only way to go, really. But you've got to be very clever with how you craft that from a technical and a creative perspective, whereas organic is much more personal. So it depends on your angle as well a lot of the time.
What do you think as well? Because I guess the kind of platform and the medium do play a part in this, but I've always felt as well, and this is again something like quite intangible and something that I've just felt intuitively, that the more different settings, doesn't even have to be necessarily environment, but the different types of content do help to progress that relationship as well. And again, I always bring these things like marketing things back to a dating analogy because I do think they're very similar. But it's kind of like if you've been on a date with someone, you go to the same place every time, you can't really progress that relationship. Whereas if you go, bowling, then you go cinema, then you go bungee jumping, you're doing all these different things, you feel more connected with that person because you've had different experiences. And I feel like that about content as well. If I consume content from someone and they're, I don't know, just talking in some room or whatever, and then I see them out and about, and then I see them in this, more professional setting in different environments, I feel like, wow, I really like these people.
I agree. There's kind of 3 core areas you should focus on when it comes to content that each kind of tick a different box, and it's I think a lot of people will be aware of it. There's different variations of it to a degree. It's called the know, like, trust strategy, or the hero hub hygiene strategy. There's different terms for it. Essentially, you have 3 different levels. You have your awareness level, which is the know. So you're creating content that's a bit, sure, it's sort of marketing you or your business or your product or your service and a very, very light sprinkle of sales to a degree. So people are kind of aware of you. Maybe it's a bit more entertainment focused. It's focused on reaching lots of people and generating awareness of you and your business. Those viewers then drive down to more of the nurture stage, which is where you create vlogs and you create longer form content. And now that they are aware of you, you've got to nurture them into a bit more of a community member. So that could be behind the scenes videos. That could be from a business perspective, recent results on a client project or something. Things that build connection and things that show your personality and highlight the journey that you're on, and you kind of build a bit of brand advocacy there. The last part of that funnel, I guess, is more conversion-based or trust content. So it's things that now somebody is aware of you. They've seen you online, they've seen your ads, or they've seen your big funny video. They now have built rapport with you, and they know what you do, how you do it, maybe some projects that you've worked on, etc. They've seen the behind the scenes of the process. They're kind of at the end of this journey where they are aware of everything that you do, and it's just got to align with when they need what you offer. This is when they consume your trust content, which are things like testimonials or case studies or credibility building content that show and position you as an authority and a credible expert in your space. And Alex Hormozi does this really well. He'll create some very broad top level, here are 3 things I wish I did in my 20s, and it's that aspires to younger people. He'll then create some vlogs of maybe how he runs his business, and maybe he'll show a bit of his team, or he'll talk about him and his partner and their journey, and it gets you to build relationships with them. And then his bottom of funnel stuff is, here's my whiteboard videos on how you do strategy. And by the way, if you have £1 million profit business, I'm happy to invest, and you can follow this link here. So it's very clever, but it's very subtle.
Yeah.
But a lot of people focus on the nurture stage. So they don't do awareness content and they don't do conversion or trust content. They focused on showing their company culture and highlighting their employee benefit schemes, or they have more founder-led personal branding. That's all very nurture, very community, very hub content. And they get stuck in this bubble where they go, well, we're not reaching more people.
Yeah,
well, of course you're not, because it's not generating new people into this nurture bubble.
Yeah.
You're just talking to the same people all the time that at the point that you recognize that, they're probably going to be very fatigued with what you've been posting. So I think for anybody listening, you've got to have that clear structure. You've got to always be bringing new fish into this pool. You're nurturing these fish over time, and then ultimately you're fishing them out when they're ready to buy. It's a input and output process that can take anywhere from a few weeks to years, depending on
buying cycle.
Depending on buyer cycle, right?
Such a good point. Do you know what's really interesting as well? I was having a conversation with a brand just yesterday, actually, like a premium kind of high-end sofa brand, and we were talking about like what platforms to use and things like that. And I was telling them about our YouTube channel, and he was like, "Oh, do you think we should be using YouTube like organically?" And I said, "Well, you have to bear in mind every business and every industry it's going to be different, because when people are thinking about buying a sofa, they're not necessarily searching for something on YouTube, right? Whereas it works for us because naturally, like if you're a founder of a business, marketing director, co-founder, you will go onto YouTube and look up like marketing strategies or, like a marketing strategy of like we do a lot of like marketing teardowns of like well-known brands, and a lot of leads come in through that content because you get marketing directors looking to learn from their competitors' strategy.
Nice, clever.
Right? So it's kind of like you have to think about where is going to be the best play. Like maybe it is that kind of short form content on socials to grab their attention. Or if you're a different type of business, maybe you can utilize search through YouTube for top of funnel. It just depends, like what does the awareness stage look like for your kind of customer? Another thing that I wanted to get your opinion on as well, which is quite interesting, because this is one of the things the guy said to me when we were speaking, is our like socials, it just feels a little bit tacky doing all of this content. Because I was saying like the biggest missing thing I saw for these guys in particular was that they didn't have the middle of funnel content. So it's kind of people are finding out about them usually through search, but then it's like, and they're doing things, they've got some amazing pieces of furniture, like sets them apart from anyone else out there. Like they don't do discounts, very kind of high-end premium, but then there's no like, you don't get that wow. Like apparently when people come into the showroom, they have this wow factor and they've never been able to convey it online before. And like that is where there's just such a missing, like a huge opportunity from a content perspective, like, reaction videos from customers and all that kind of good stuff. How do you like how, what are your thoughts in terms of like, you know, because it's that whole question of like, does this align with our brand? Is it going to make us look tacky? And I get my kind of initial response to that, my initial thoughts. Well, look, for the people who aren't on social, they're not on social, so you're not going to reach them. But the people who are on social, they want to see like different stuff. You know,
depends on your customers, depends on your viewers. Like, it's going to be very different marketing a direct-to-consumer business as it is a business-to-business business. You know, business to business, people buy from people. All the time, it's built through years of relationships and long-term rapport building. You know, direct to consumer stuff, it's people aren't buying the founders or the journey of the people that run the business. They're buying, is this product good enough and does it solve the problem that I have? So there's different types of content that you need to create depending on the type of business that you're doing. For anything that's, you know, direct to consumer, or it's a physical, tangible e-commerce product, I think doing something different is really important now, because a lot of D2C stuff feels very similar. It's all gone down the route of the easiest barrier to entry, film on your phone, user-generated content, you know, make it feel natural and authentic. But again, the problem with that is stylistically, it looks the same as every other D2C brand on the planet at the moment. It's very hard to differentiate yourself from a brand level with that content. But two, just the ideas around content are really hard if that's how you're approaching it. So for brand, for example, you've also got to take into consideration brand as well. You know, someone like the Cotswold Company aren't going to be sawing a sofa in half for a YouTube video, because it's not the premium level of their brand, right? And that could damage it. But I do think there's opportunities to do something different, regardless of what type of brand you are, regardless of whether you're McDonald's and you're a very sort of affordable household name of a brand, whether you are the Cotswold Company. There's things that you can do differently. It's just about talking to people that challenge your perspective on things. I think the problem with internal marketing teams or people that make content in-house is they have that very restricted vision of what they can create. This is why I love agencies, because they challenge your perspective on things, and they have so many different insights in what other people are doing that not necessarily in your space, that just open horizons and open opportunities to go, you know what, I never even thought of doing that. That's such a cool idea. Let's test it. That brings me on to my other point on this, is it's just testing content. Like, once you found your style, great, evolve it. Continue to innovate it. Continue to try new things and test out other variations of content. I would never just stick to a specific style. That's worked, but the thing is, people evolve very quickly. Social evolves daily at the moment. What worked yesterday might not work today or tomorrow. So you've got to constantly innovate in what you create. You've got to constantly offer a new experience for people to digest, so that they don't get fatigued, the content doesn't get fatigued. But at the same time, you've got to be very clever, because you don't want to damage brand reputation, and you want to make it something that is very easily identifiable from a brand perspective. So this is what I was kind of saying at the start, content is not easy. It is a big mixture of science and technical and creative and testing and time, and there's so many other factors that go into making great content. But it's not just making great content, it's continuing to make great content that's really hard. And from my experience, a lot of people really struggle with that.
And what about, so like you mentioned, obviously there's a lot that goes into that whole content creation process, and there's a lot of considerations for businesses to be thinking about. How would you go about kind of so you mentioned, like, you know, the example of like sawing a sofa in half, for example, like, you know, these really extreme videos. Like, how do you kind of set like guardrails? Is that like, how would you usually kind of think about that as a brand, as a business? It's like, okay, is that what you would do? Would you set up guardrails, sort of like, okay, this is like a no-go zone for us?
Yeah, it depends on brand again, but it also depends on who you're targeting with that content. So younger generations, you know, don't want to offend anybody, millennial or below listening, they resonate with content that's a little bit bold, a little bit extra. Whereas older generations, millennial plus, they struggle to connect with non-traditional forms of marketing. So someone who's in their 60s, and this is I'm just making an assumption here, but someone in their 60s is not going to buy a sofa because you've made a funny stress test video online and maybe you've put a ton of bricks on a sofa to see how it lasts. Gen Zs will love that because it's funny and it's entertaining and it's a little bit different. But again, it comes down to brand. It's who do you want your customers to be? What do you want them to do? What's their living situation? Do they have dispensable income? It's all these other things that play a factor. If you want to be a premium brand, humor and being fun and being entertaining is maybe not the right approach. It's much more down to that authoritarian credibility, kind of best in class tone of voice. But you see brands like Liquid Death are a big one that I love at the moment.
Liquid Death's amazing.
They're so good, and they've tapped into this really clever Gen Z millennial mindset where people just want something different. They've done it in a space where it's incredibly competitive, it's incredibly oversaturated, content is very easily fatigued because so many people in the D2C space are making similar looking stuff, and they've gone, what can we do that's totally weird, that's going to make us really stand out? Let's try this approach. And it's worked for them. If anybody listening hasn't watched the Liquid Death stuff, go and check it out.
100%.
It's just so good.
Even their email newsletter as well.
Yeah,
I'm
subscribed to that.
Sign your, was it like Sign Your Life?
It's Sign Your Life way, something like that. That's it. It's so good. Yeah. And I just wish more new businesses had that mindset to test and just to see who bites on what type of content, They could have gone down the more traditional route of Evian and Buxton, and you're talking about water here. It's trying to make it fun and it's trying to make it exciting, and that's why they're growing so fast. It's because they're tapping into a demand that people just want new content to engage with. They want to build relationships with the brand that they trust, and that builds brand advocacy. That builds long-term customer relationships. But you've got to go that extra mile to do something a little bit different, But again, it comes down to how you want to position as a brand. It's a very fine line creating stuff like Liquid Death as well. Like, it can be brand damaging doing that sort of stuff. It's creating stuff that's fun and creating stuff that's entertaining. There's a really fine line between people are laughing with you and people are laughing at you. And it can be really cringy as a business to make stuff that's funny. So you've got to have the right people in the team to be able to pull that off.
That's the tricky thing about testing, though, isn't it? Experimentation, like to an extent, it kind of comes down to how risk averse you are as an individual or as a business.
Definitely, I think it's becoming more important to be a bit more, a bit more adverse to pushing the boat out a little bit. I think because content is incredibly saturated, and I know I've said that a lot in this conversation, but it's in my opinion, more important than ever to do something different to other people. I think there's so much potential. There's so much opportunity online from a content perspective. But you've got to remember, like, a lot of people, for the most part, don't run big brands. If they run big brands, chances are they're probably not listening to this podcast, or maybe they are, I don't know. But they're going to have the best of the best people in this team who are marketing vets, who have lived the experience, who are so clever at psychology. Most people are probably small businesses, medium businesses, and they're not thinking about the Liquid Death ad. They're thinking about, how do we now market our team? How do we now personal brand our founder? So it's stuff that I don't think warrants that level of boldness. Yeah. But there's still a lot of room to innovate within, That's what I'd say. Even my stuff, like, it's not anything new. It's just a bit different. Like, it's lent into personality as opposed to how wacky can we go. It's just trying to lean into what my strengths are on camera. A bit quirky, a bit strange, but I know my stuff. And it's that kind of fun experience of you're learning something about marketing or you're learning something about video from a guy that isn't taking himself too seriously, but knows what he's doing because the quality of the content is really good.
It's a really valid point, because that's the next thing I wanted to ask you, actually. Like, because I think the big thing with B2B brands, like a huge problem that I see with a lot of like B2B content is it's so like people don't like, it's almost like they're allergic to kind of really giving like I know people talk about this. It's almost like become this like cringe phrase now, like give value, especially in like the B2B space, right? It's all about like value, and it's kind of like, what is value? And the problem I see is that the form of value people give is the kind of answer you can just get from ChatGPT. Like if I was to go on ChatGPT, like any industry, whatever industry you're in, like whether you're selling flipping medical devices, whether you're selling like, you know, corporate training programs, whatever you're selling, if the content you're creating is something I can just go onto Google and find, I'm just not going to engage with it. You have to lean into like stories and like because that is the thing that ChatGPT as of now can't replicate, because it doesn't have your personal stories. It doesn't have your personal experiences. And that's where there is a lot of value to be had. And that's something you do very well, right, with your content. And I think why people kind of consume it, because you use a lot of stories and a lot of examples, and it's, you know, and even storytelling is a bit of this kind of like buzzword, right? But it doesn't, like, when I first heard it, I was like, what does that mean? Like, you know, you got these books like Hero with 1,000 Faces or whatever, and it's kind of like you can get lost in this whole story. It doesn't need to be complex. It's just like you have personal experiences.
Definitely.
Share them.
Well, I mean, any great story has 3 different stages. So you have the setup, the conflict, and the resolution. Marvel follow this in any of their films. Any love story will have the same thing. You have the setup, people fall in love. There's a bit of a problem, there's a bit of a conflict, and they split up, and then they get back together, and that's the solution. It's this whole cycle of overcoming this villain, right? And stories can be as big as of a Marvel film, or they can be as simple as a 30-second video talking about that you sell this product. This is the problem that a lot of people face. This is how your product solves that solution. It can be really simple. I think, and you touched on there from a B2B perspective, thought leadership is another thing that I see a lot of. But I think thought leadership has been now an overused term, and because it is so oversaturated, there's a lot of people reuse existing thoughts from other people. They'll post quotes from other people.
Quotables.
That's it. And I believe that thought leadership is about challenging different perspectives, and it's talking from your experience. And that's where stories come from, naturally. You don't have to think about crafting a story because it's a lived experience and you have had that previous situation happen.
And it's,
right?
It's adding, actually, sorry to kind of cut in there, but it's adding your kind of interpretation
Definitely
to that experience, right?
I agree.
Because I've just thought like anyone can reshare a story, but when you add your unique perspective.
And that's why that thought leadership or that narrative style content works really well from a personal brand perspective, because people buy into you and your story and your experience and your journey. That's what I've had the luxury of being able to lean into, being a 20-year-old guy building a sort of second business now. But people, especially maybe in decision-making roles, who are maybe in their late 20s, their 30s, their 40s, they resonate with that because they've maybe been through a similar thing. So they like seeing that growth, and they like to give advice, and it creates this really tight-knit community of people that are advocates of my journey and want to support that success. But again, the same thing can be worked in a D2C space. I know I'm just focusing on these 2 industries, as much more than that, but setup, conflict resolution is applied in some very good adverts. Even Liquid Death, I'm going to go back to this one. They posted one recently, and it was one of their customers was a zombie at the start of this film, so it's showing the setup. The pain is that they're dehydrated and they've turned into a zombie, but it's exacerbated and it's exaggerated for comedic effect. And the solution is, we'll try these new hydration powders, and before you know it, you're great and you can crack on. That is a very simple narrative told in a very extrovert way that does a great job of instilling the brand in people's minds because it's memorable. It does a great job of showing the product, the pain that customers go through, and the solution that their product provides. And it subtly sells as well. It's mentioning Liquid Death. It's talking about the USPs of the product in a fun way that make it something that people actually want to watch, rather than what a lot of people do, which is push marketing. They'll tell people, they'll show why they'll shout about why they're great and why their 3 USPs mean they're the best agency on the planet, or whatever it is. More people need to transition to pull marketing. It's creating content that people want to watch, where the content is crafted so cleverly it doesn't feel like you're being sold to.
Yes.
But again, that's so hard.
It is
so hard to do.
But it's such a good point, and it's so important, and I always say this to people, like whenever I'm looking at ad campaigns, for like clients, potential clients, they look and feel like ads. And this is a problem. I'm always saying, like, people don't want to consume ads. That's why they're not working. The best ads are the ones that, to your point, they don't feel like ads. You don't know. And it always makes me laugh when people say, oh, marketing doesn't work on me. Of course it flipping works on you. You just don't realize it's marketing.
Definitely.
That's why all these brands that you're wearing, they're like, you know, sitting there saying marketing doesn't work on me, wearing all these like brands, right? Or having the latest iPhone, or all these Apple products. It's just a very subtle thing that people don't even realize is happening. That is what good marketing is.
I agree. Marketing is a big aggravation. Though marketing, I think people see marketing as you post a bit of content online and that's it. But marketing is an aggravation of public relations, communications, social media, paid ads, organic content, design. It's a big thing. Marketing is not just posting content on social media and going, well, my marketing hasn't worked. For some people in very specific, very niche industries, content might not do as well as others. And I'm trying to think of an example. I'm thinking like, I don't know, brain surgery. There's not really much content you can create to promote brain surgery because it's not necessarily something that you look for. It's something that you need in a very dire situation, right? Whereas Costa Coffee, for example, they need to do tons and tons and tons of content because it's trying to instill brand reputation and stand out in a very competitive space. Whereas Costa Coffee, I'm just saying this because I'm looking at my Costa Coffee cup, it's a lifestyle brand. So even down to Starbucks. Starbucks don't promote coffee, they promote productivity. They promote a space to work that you can get stuff done and be really efficient by consuming this brand. Costa Coffee is more of a lifestyle. Costa Coffee is more of a lifestyle brand where you're on the go, you're commuting, it's your pick me up for the day, it's something to look forward to, etc. So they sell the same products, but it's instilling a different emotion in that buyer journey.
Almost like an association as well.
100%.
Brand.
100%. It's why brands like Off-White or these very hype brands that, you know, they can charge £300-400 for a t-shirt because you feel exclusive, and it promotes that feeling of maybe ego. I'm a bit better than you. I'm more successful. That caters to a very particular type of person, whereas M&S, which I've recently started shopping in because it's very affordable and very good stuff.
Not an ad.
Not an ad. No, not an ad. I don't get commission. They have a very different marketing approach, right? It just comes down to how do you want to position yourself? Who are you trying to attract? And what content does that consumer resonate on an emotional level that gets them to be part of that brand experience?
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
Dude, this has been super fun, super interesting. We're going to have to do a part 2 because
I think that's a good one.
Running out of time, but it's been amazing. So if people want to get in touch with Oydssey, tell us a little bit about you, like where they can find you, what kind of services.
So hit us up on website www.theoydseyagency.co.uk. Or check us out on LinkedIn. It's where we predominantly post a lot of our content. My name's Jack Gaisford. Just search for me there and you'll find it.
On LinkedIn.
But other than that, I mean, I just enjoy posting content. Like, I'm not one to push what we do. I like people to come to us because they see us as the experts in this space. I'm always trying to help people, no matter how big, how small. So if you've got any questions, fire them away. Happy to help where I can. But yeah, just enjoy consuming the stuff that we put out, and I hope it helps you guys listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Jack.
No worries, Tom. It's been a pleasure.